sure he'll have lots of things to say today as opposed to yesterday.
The governor actually have things to say?
The answers are all there.
He doesn't really say much, does he?
By just talking about restoring credibility, not giving ideas on how to restore credibility.
Should explore.
Yeah.
Well, he is Tennessee's foremost moral authority for like
Right hand of God.
the Tennessee Pope.
Tennessee Pope.
Which fits with my
Can you leave
white
me alone?
smoke theory that
Yeah.
we should always be releasing white smoke.
Hello?
Have a new pope.
No, it has not. I will call when I am turning it on. All right.
Can we get him appointed?
Oh, some of you guys.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Give it a switch. Shortcut.
Yeah, she went out.
They'll never find you, Joe.
Right.
They'll never find you.
And better now than at 6 o'clock.
Probably, yeah. They have GPSs in our cars.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I hadn't heard anything until suddenly, you know.
I don't think that's happening.
I don't think it's a real thing. I think
No,
somebody was confused about it. That it's,
I just took his cast off asking.
And all the photographers said the same thing.
Also, the FBI has not shown up yet at Cassidy's office.
Allegedly.
but at least this office.
Well, there was a suspicious janitorial crew member wheeling in some garbage, so might be someone in there. Generally, they work with the cheese platter where you hide someone.
I like being able to say, oh, I'm not on call, I'm on the clock.
Yes.
Who's going to talk today?
I saw at least Bill
Huh?
Watson.
Who's going to talk today?
I assume Stewart.
Bill Mitchell. I saw Stewart at least. Press conference was just a rumor, according to Doug.
You guys trying to get Harwell?
We tried the other day. But we have to, I think, lay out like biscuits and treats.
She seems
Get her out of
eager
here.
than she used to be. Those red little thing where she has to hide.
She'll leave cryptic statements in a nod of retreat.
Now that she has nothing to lose, that she wouldn't care less, but it's not.
Can't you stand up there for us and I check?
You sure you don't want somebody taller? Check 1, 2, 3. The Public Integrity section oversees a federal effort to combat corruption through the prosecution of elected and appointed public officials at all levels of government. This section, et cetera, et cetera. I got the hard rap on that one.
10:35.
So that was like,
I thought you were just reciting this public integrity code. That was good.
Yeah, you can give this
I've
one.
committed it to memory.
I was gonna say,
Spying on the speaker now.
You're not the only one. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
take a moment. I think, Kathy, you're going to live stream it. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. It's heavy. It bent it over. Thank you all for coming. Yesterday, we received an alarming news report, credit where credit is due, from the Tennessean, that astonishingly revealed that a surveillance system was set up to allow Speaker Cassada's office to surveil meetings, private meetings going on in committee rooms at a time when the official cameras were not on. You know, we have as a caucus specifically been told that the committee rooms are not filmed and not recorded except during official public committee hearings. Many meetings occur in these rooms that are private, and we, members of the Democratic caucus and members of the Republican caucus and members of the public, have a right to an expectation of privacy when they're meeting in these rooms paid for by the Tennessee citizens, except during times when, according to official policy, there are publicized hearings occurring. Today, I'm calling on the United States Attorney's Office to immediately commence an investigation to determine whether or not the surveillance of private meetings with no consent violated state and or federal laws. As you are well aware, the Justice Department has an entire section devoted to public corruption. That is the organization, along with the United States Attorney here in Nashville, that should inquire into this very serious matter. I am not a surveillance lawyer, but a review of the statutes and what we've always understood demonstrates that when you have secret, unauthorized recordings taken in the state of Tennessee where there's no consent by anybody who's communicating, that is a felony under our law. In addition, I would call on Speaker Cassada today to answer the question, was he aware that this surveillance system, which apparently and unsurprisingly Lieutenant Governor McNally did not have, that this surveillance system was actually improperly used to secretly eavesdrop on meetings for which there was an obvious expectation of privacy? Was he aware of this? Did his office take recordings of meetings that were private? Were those recordings distributed or discussed? Was eavesdropping discussed in meetings by Republican office holders? These are facts that need to be revealed today. But it's not enough, obviously, for us to simply have a response to the press. The United States Attorney is tasked with ferreting out public corruption in this state. That is the official that should take the lead on conducting an investigation into this extraordinary, dishonorable behavior to determine what crimes have been committed, and if so, to take appropriate action to see that the wrongdoers are punished under the law. You cannot have a democracy function if people cannot have discussions and expect that in places where they have an expectation of privacy, that expectation be met. Once again, we're seeing behavior that smacks of stuff that we would read about in third world countries with weak and developing governments. This is the United States of America, supposed to be a beacon of hope for people all across the world. We've set the standard for open, transparent government, for private rights, for the rights of privacy. And if in fact it's true that a spying system was set up, then we need to know what officials used it and what individuals in government were responsible for setting it up. Who was aware that this existed? Did anyone question it? And we need to know all the other facts. We've heard from LIS personnel this week. They've been quoted in the press. Are these the very same people that were directly involved in setting up what appears to be an unlawful surveillance system? Or the setting up of a system that was designed to allow unlawful surveillance, couched within a system that could be used for lawful means? It doesn't really make any difference. It's a crime either way, as I read the statute. So this is we have a lot of press conferences, but this is a grave and serious matter. This is not something that just needs to be discussed. It needs to be investigated. The technology needs to be reviewed and analyzed. The people involved, and certainly the people in the Speaker's office who are involved, elected and otherwise, need to go under oath and answer specific questions about this and explain to the public what exactly happened under penalty of perjury. I mean, this is a very grave and serious matter, and it needs to be treated as such. And once again, I call on the United States Attorney and the Department of Justice's Public Corruptions Office to immediately begin an investigation. Thank you. Representative Mitchell is here. Do you have any other further comments?
Yeah. Again, with my colleague, I call on the U.S. Attorney's Office to immediately come before and investigate this, because evidence can be destroyed, and I'm concerned that every day that passes, evidence of recordings and other items that may have been conducted illegal will be destroyed. So we're calling upon the Attorney's Office, U.S. Attorney's Office, to come in immediately. There's no time to waste for these actions to be taken. Over the past week or so, we've seen members of our General Assembly attempt to be locked in our chamber. We've seen text messages that should never be discussed in 2019, and it just never ceases to amaze me what the leadership of the Tennessee House is able to stoop to. And we need to move on this quickly, and the quicker the better. Thank you.
With that, we'd open it up to questions.
Have you officially contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office?
We're drafting a letter right now, and I will be officially contacting them today.
What kind of meetings have been taking place in there that you would consider private?
Well, we've had caucus meetings in which we've discussed strategy, specifically arranged to have these particular rooms. And again, our caucus was specifically assured that the cameras in these rooms are only on and used during official committee hearings. So that's just one example. But I guarantee you, if you ask around, people, Democrat and Republican, use these rooms all the time for all sorts of private meetings.
Can you think of any other examples?
That's the best example I can think of.
You'll be walking down the hall, and a organization needs to meet with you immediately. You have a bill coming up in a committee across the hall. There's an empty committee room. You'll walk over into that committee room and talk a private conversation with someone about a piece of legislation maybe coming up, and you have an expectation of privacy because there's no one else in the room with you. There's no committee going on, so the cameras and the microphones should not be activated. But if they have that capability, one person has that capability to sit in his office with big screen TVs and see you walk in and immediately activate the microphones, that's highly illegal.
Can that be done remotely, activating the microphone?
That's what's reported today. That's the way I read the news reports. Like, obviously, one can easily determine the capability of the technology with a 4-minute conversation with the Speaker of the House and his now fired Chief of Staff and the people that worked for him, and frankly the people that installed these systems that have been reported.
In addition to the committee meeting rooms, have been several members who I've talked to who said that they either plan to or have had their offices swept for fear of having their offices bugged. Do you, as a caucus, have several or any members that have come to you about that issue? Do you fear your office has been bugged?
I don't fear my office has been bugged because it's the United States of America, and it would never occur to me that someone would do such a dishonorable thing as to bug my office regardless of the law. So I don't have such an expectation. I've heard rumors about that, and I actually can't remember. I mean, rumors have been in the plaza about that, and I have viewed them as just your standard chatter, because the notion that someone would bug this office to me is so outrageous and so beyond the pale of what we should expect in the United States of America that it never occurred to me that someone would actually do that. If they did, then that needs to be investigated, because it would be an extraordinary violation, yet another, for public officials to have their offices bugged. But it's really, I would say, that's just one variation of what we're already talking about. If in fact private meetings, private legislative meetings, sidebar conferences during committees were improperly bugged, obviously that is completely outrageous. It's nothing that any normal public official would ever do or sanction, and it's completely improper.
My fear is, a sweep is not necessary. My fear is the capability and technology already exists in our office with our phone system. I'm not a telecommunications expert, but my fear is that the phone system has the capability of people who have the top authority on the system can more or less, it's an intercom system, so they can just push that office and turn on the microphone like an intercom in your system and listen to any conversation, listen to this press conference currently that we're having, if they have the capability of the top line authority on the phone system. So doing a sweep of your office may not, render any evidence of any illegal activity. It's already sitting on our desk, unfortunately.
And I would add one more thing to that. We don't have control over everything that happens in our country, but I can tell you what, we are not going to allow the state of Tennessee to be a place where regular American values are trampled upon. This building better be a place where people can have private conversations without being spied on as if they're in Russia or China. This better be a place where people can conduct the people's business without fear of illegal surveillance. And this is not just another day in the legislature. If this really happened, then it sounds like crimes have been committed, and if crimes have been committed, they need to be fully prosecuted. And there needs to be no stopping before this matter is fully accounted for, before the public is fully informed. If illegal spying has been conducted, the public has a right to know on what days, to what extent, who is spied upon. If our citizens have come to the legislature with an expectation that they're in a place that honors reasonable, normal American values and everything we do in our country, and that has been violated, that needs to be investigated fully, and not just discussed, but fully investigated by law enforcement with the power to take witness testimony under oath, under penalty of perjury, to demand documents, to review computer records, and all the employees, if there are employees in this building that were responsible for this or complicit, they need to be fully investigated. This is ridiculous if in fact what's reported in the newspaper has occurred, and it sounds like it's criminal activity, and the only reason I'm qualifying it is because I myself am not a surveillance lawyer. I'm not a criminal lawyer. So we need to get the criminal lawyers at the U.S. Attorney's Office to make an analysis. They need to come in here. They need to discover the facts. This is a matter of government corruption of the most serious level imaginable and needs to be fully and thoroughly investigated. Thank you very much.
If Speaker Cassidy
Yes.
himself was watching some of these private meetings, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, then he needs to be investigated criminally if in fact the U.S. Attorney determines that that is a crime.
Also want to go back to some of these texts from last week and some of these other revelations that have been coming out. This morning, it appeared that Speaker Cassidy may have known that these text messages were authentic last week, even though he claimed they weren't. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, I would think that the public expects public officials to tell the truth when they speak publicly. So I would say if in fact the evidence is that a leader here is not telling the truth to the public, then it raises the question whether or not they're really capable of performing their public role. Obviously, I've already called for Speaker Cassidy's resignation, so you kind of know we've already, as a caucus, we've already made that determination. But yes, again, the notion, and I will say this, again, not to bring just core patriotism into play again, but the fact is, one of the things we do in the United States of America is we have honest discussions. We speak honestly about the facts of public things that are occurring. That way our public is it can engage in our decision-making process over time. When public officials look in the cameras or speak to a print reporter and lie, it makes it impossible for the whole system to work because the public has no ability to really evaluate what's going on. So it's not a small matter if in fact what you're saying turns out to be correct. It's never a small matter when a public official makes a statement knowing that it is untrue, because our whole system will fall apart if the public can't assume that what we say is at least our understanding of the truth. You know, people make mistakes, people say things that turn out to operate differently. That's different from saying things that you know are untrue. And if in fact Speaker Cassidy did that, then that's just further evidence that he needs to step down.
What bothers you the most about those text messages?
You mean all the text messages we've heard reported? I think it just shows people engaged in behavior that should disqualify any public official. When you use a text message that shares openly racist information, wars have been fought to eliminate those sort of statements from our public life. School children in Tennessee should never think that their officials are willing to just openly countenance open racism and the sort of crazy statements that we've seen reported. It's just, again, it shows that you're not really representing all the people of Tennessee, which is what we're meant to do. Believe me, I'm in the minority. I lose a lot of political battles. But if a Republican is able to assemble the votes in a legitimate way and speak truthfully, and they get the committee to pass their bill and not mine, that's how the system's supposed to work. And my problem is I have to go out and elect some more people, okay? But that's different from lying. That's different from using illegal Chinese-style surveillance. That's different from making statements that show I disregard millions of people that live in this state and denigrate them. Those are illegitimate behaviors that are not behaviors that should be permitted in our leaders.
And back to your question, the racist text and comments were, that alone was disqualifying. But then you get the sexist and, sexual discrimination type text that came out following. What was most astonishing to me is the time period in which they sent those texts to one another was at the same time period that the Jeremy Durham investigation was ongoing. It was about the same time period that the Attorney General's report came out, in which Speaker Casta had already been interviewed by the Attorney General's office in regards to that investigation over Jeremy Durham's actions, and his actions seemed to be along the same lines of Jeremy Durham's.
Well, you brought up the issue of when the doors were locked the last day of the session. Can you talk more about that and what exactly happened there? There was a big scuffle at the door. Talk more about what happened all that day.
The bottom line is we were in recess, and we had just been notified right before the recess that Speaker Casta had seen there was a conference committee that was appointed over the Medicaid block grants. Well, the Democrats, we saw forth that was an opportunity to bring forth a minority report for a Medicaid expansion as our minority report. They caught wind of that, and they disbanded the first conference committee, reappointed a new conference committee in which they weren't going to let the opposing voice be heard at all. They were just not going to appoint any Democrats. So at the recess, we saw that if we go in recess and go down the hall and just don't come back, they didn't have enough members to have a quorum because 20-something of the Republicans had already quit for the day. He heard wind of that, and I guess he wanted to pass his block grant or whatever else he wanted to pass that day, and he decided he was going to come block the doors and lock us in. Myself and probably 3/4 of the Democrats had already left the chamber, and at that point in time, they were trying to block the doors, and a few of our members tried to go out, and one of our members was forcibly detained by a member of his security staff.
Well, I think once again, we've had all sorts, so we have lots of legislative press conferences.
Yeah.
It's rare we have a press conference in which we're calling for a federal investigation of this body. But when you read a newspaper and you see that a surveillance system has been installed apparently to allow spying on private legislative meetings by public officials, that's such an extraordinary breach of faith, such an extraordinary departure from normal expectations in American life that we felt we had to call a press conference immediately. Again, I'm calling on the U.S. Attorney in his capacity as an investigator of public corruption to immediately open an investigation. This matter needs to be fully investigated. It cannot be swept under the rug. Speaker Casta needs to specifically provide all the facts today about this. This shouldn't require, we shouldn't have to wait until subpoenas are issued to know what the Republicans are saying about this story. It's an extraordinary breach of trust. From my reading of the statutes, it's a felony, and we need an investigation right now. Thank you so much.
Quick question on your reading of the statutes, federal statutes?
The statutes I'm looking at were state statutes.
Pardon?
Statutes I looked at this morning were state statutes.
Okay.
If I can go down, I would point out. But public corruption is always within the ambit of the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney.